my name is Jay Andrews, a meditation yoga teacher and musician. Currently living in Toronto, but from Halifax, Nova Scotia. For those listening, if you don't know where that is, it's on the east coast of Canada. Not the farthest east because there's an island out there called Newfoundland, but it's pretty far east. If you look across, you'd see England, probably, if you had good eyesight. I started getting into music when I was 7. That's when I first started. And I started by studying drumming, specifically pipe band drumming. Was the first kind of introduction into learning music. Yeah, my parents weren't playing music very much, but on the east coast of Canada, music's quite prevalent. If you've ever been there, then you would understand. It's music is kind of everywhere. So that's how I first began, and my mom took me to start drumming because my parents had gotten divorced a year earlier, and I was just kind of bumping around different things as far as activities kind of go. So drumming started there. I started competing in pipe bands. So it was an introduction to Celtic music in that way, but also the structure of tunes and how Celtic music is structured, how tunes are structured, both in a band and both in, we could say maybe like more freestyle Celtic music. Yeah. So I played drums, right until I was 19, and I was well into it. I went to a few world championships, won the North American championships when I was 14, and Canadian championships when I was 14, and then 3 world championships over in Glasgow, Scotland. And that was kind of the extent of my music career up to that point. So right up until I was about 18. Yeah, right until kind of the end of high school. And once I got to the end of high school, I started to sustain an injury in one of my arms, my left arm. And it was from playing so often at a high level at a really young age. So even before I had hit puberty, I was playing 7-8 hours a day, for instance. My body was trying to grow, but because of the playing and the stress on the arm, I ended up pinching a bunch of nerves in the back of my neck, and it was a mess. At the worst of it, it was really, my hand would like shake quite a bit. So I actually stopped drumming for a while. And that's when I started to move into electronic music, but also kind of opened the door on drumming, because this one particular style of drumming in pipe band drum corps wasn't accessible totally anymore because of that injury. So I started adventuring kind of into African drumming and frame drumming and a lot of like vocal beatboxing. That's where I started DJing eventually. And DJing came quite easily, because if you play drums, then you can learn how to match beats pretty easily as far as DJing goes. So I started DJing, and I thought that was around the age of 18 when I stopped competing and started moving into that. DJing. So I was working with electronic music. Now I had moved away from Celtic music and drumming almost completely for about 2 or 3 years. And I was just DJing. Kind of getting into the scene in Halifax, starting to get into like the downtown club scene when I turned 19. So by the time I was 19, I was in clubs. And yeah, it was just, that's what I was doing, but I started to really miss drumming. I started to miss Celtic music as well. So I started to introduce those back into my life pretty softly, not competing in pipe bands, but playing with fiddlers and playing with Celtic artists, playing drums. And eventually what had happened was I started melding the DJing and the Celtic music together, bringing Celtic music and electronic music to meet. That actually started when I'm 34 now, so I probably started messing with that when I was about 20. And that was kind of where I was working. And then I created a show called Sticks for a while, which was, I used to play this huge, like racked drum kit, this standing drum kit with like 22 drums or something on it. And then I DJ at the same time. And I toured with that for many years. I was still struggling with my arm, but I really wanted to play drums, so I was playing and then going to physio all the time. But that's what I ended up doing for a while. You know, it just kind of like I kind of fell into that loop. So it was electronic Celtic music, and I started working with a fiddler named Ashley McIsaac from Canada. Touring, I still tour with him every once in a while. We produced a record together, and I was just kind of running that circuit until about the age of 28. Yeah, but unfortunately, my father passed away when I was 21. When I was on the road on tour at some point, and the clubbing and that lifestyle started to really exponentially explode my drinking. So I was working and traveling and producing music, but I was drinking a lot in order to deal with things from about the age of 21 to 28. But I was working, I was making music and doing what I needed to do. So when I turned 27, when I was 27, I think, I wanted to make a change because in the east coast of Canada, there's lots of venues to play, but I pretty much played all of them in one show or another, theaters and clubs and bars and whatever, universities. And I wanted to expand the music. There was also a part of me, I think, that knew I needed to get away from trying to drink so much. So when you're in a cycle of a scene in any city and you're partying a lot, it's hard to break that. So I ended up deciding to move to Toronto, and the idea of moving to Toronto, Canada, was to enhance the music, to see if I could take the music more broad scale. And I was originally thinking about moving to Montreal in Quebec. Montreal used to have a really, they still do have quite a good electronic and DJ scene, but they used to have a really flourishing one. And there was a DJ from Halifax named Scratch Bastard, who I've done a bunch of shows with, and he had moved to Montreal and then moved on to Toronto. So I ended up getting a conversation with him. I was telling him about maybe moving to Montreal, and the electronic scene had kind of been a little bit shifting more over to Toronto. So that's why I ended up coming to Toronto. And because there's tons of venues and it's a lot easier to fly out of Toronto as well. So for all the gigs I had to do on the road, it was easier for me to fly out of Toronto. It was cheaper. And there's an airport downtown here, which is pretty close. So that was another reason I moved to Toronto. So I came here and I continued working with Ashley McIsaac, continued DJing, continued blending Celtic and electronic music together in the project I call Stream. About a year later, I had to get sober because the drinking hadn't stopped. So actually it got exponentially worse. So I had to get sober. And when I got sober, I had to stop working for a little while. And the experience of getting sober and doing 12 steps changed my outlook on pretty much everything, including music. Because it's addicted to booze, but it's also addicted to money. And when your source of money is music, and you become more addicted to money than to music, you start to compromise the music you're making in order to make more money. Because that's one of the biggest addictions I had, was that. So I needed to reframe my relationship with music almost completely. So I stopped working. I stopped traveling for 3 months. That's when I started to dive more into what's called Nada Yoga, which is a yoga philosophy system and practice system that works around vibration, essentially, as being the source of creation, and the levels of consciousness and the levels of many things, just all resolving back to a resonance, theory of resonance. So that's essentially how I started moving into kind of making yoga music. I had to reframe my relationship with Celtic music a little bit. I'm still making that music and still working with that. I just had to reframe my relationship with why I was doing it, and what music really is, and how sound influences us, and why. My main interest was why I kept playing music because everything else had fallen away except partying. But there was always music, and I was always interested in why that was the only thing left. So that's kind of been the journey. And then the last few years now, I've just gotten much deeper into the idea of Nada yoga and practices of meditation, practices of listening, and ideas of how music can help settle the mind into meditative states, levels of consciousness. And that's kind of been my main focus now, well, I guess 2 years since COVID, because it's just studying a lot, reading and practicing and finding teachers within the last, I mean, generally the last 5 years, but the last 2 has gotten pretty strict. And then studying particular forms of chant and vocal resonance and drumming. So the DJing side of it kind of fell off. But the electronic music and Celtic music together, and then moving into Nada yoga, producing music for practice, and studying different techniques. Now I'm studying Japanese shakuhachi, which is the Japanese bamboo flute, and vocal work, and then of course a ton of philosophy and developing a system of practice which works on really subtle listening practices, which we find through different lineages, which we can talk about if you'd like. So that's kind of how I ended up here. And here we are now, still in Toronto so far. Yeah, I've had 2 main mentors who I met here in Toronto. I didn't start doing yoga or meditating until I got sober 5 years ago. That was the only time I started. And once I started, it became the main focus of my life because it was integrated with the recovery process. And I've been studying, I've pretty much done a degree in studying about sound and yoga, but definitely had mentors. Neither of them are musicians. One of them plays harmonium and has taught me some chanting, mainly yoga mentors. And I was just out with dinner with them 2 days ago. So I still keep in contact with them, and then I'll go on retreats with one of them coming up in the next few months. One of the mentors is the one who pointed me to Nada yoga, because it's quite a niche sector of yoga. It's not very well documented or studied, which is interesting because it runs through all lines of yoga. Essentially, it runs through all lines as a primary philosophy and idea, theory, and practice as well. But it seems to have fallen away in contemporary yoga, I think because of the focus on asana, body posture yoga. And so one of the mentors really pointed me in that direction. Yeah. And the other one I still obviously talk to, and I've really studied asana and very unique approaches to moving the body with both of them. I don't know if I would be able to do what I do without some sort of mentorship. I think it's extremely important. And then, of course, I've studied with a bunch of other teachers, non-dual teachers and Nada yoga teachers, classical musicians, teach particular forms of chant. Yeah, many teachers. Because of the approach that I'm interested in, it's hard to find. It's very difficult to find particular teachers for certain things. So I'm really kind of still searching for knowledge and reading a ton. Yeah. Teaching is interesting. It's kind of just become a play off of what I study and do all day anyways. So I don't feel that there's much of a break, a division between my day-to-day life and the way I live, and then going to teach, because I'm just leading people through things that I study and practice anyways. Yeah, so there's kind of a clear line I find in the teaching. As far as doing more therapeutic work with folks, that moves along the lines of embodiment, which I've studied realization processing, the realization process with a doctor in New York named Judith Blackstone. And that work is very interesting because it uses self-realization, non-dual realization, as the therapeutic process. Yeah. So again, it's not it's something I'm kind of studying and doing all the time in my own in my own life. So I find that it moves quite clearly between those two. I do find that teaching brings a lot of information. You can learn a lot by leading classes and things, which is definitely beneficial. And I love sharing things that have helped me in recovery, for instance, or deal with things from the past. And so it's very beneficial in that way. It also brings challenges, but it adds a vibrancy to the practice and the study, I think, just in general.
Your life has been filled with a lot of sound and a lot of noise.
There's been a lot of noise, yeah. A lot of trauma, especially from childhood, that I had to work through. But what I think what I come to learn in Nada Yoga and listening, and specifically Buddhist practices, is that the thing that defines noise and sound, we'd say good or bad, is essentially the mind. It's this perception, the habitual perception of the mind. And I feel like the noise, even though it's harmful when it's painful when it's happening, there's a lot to learn from the noise, from the events, the traumas, the things that have happened. So I feel like it's important to listen to both of those. And the difference which makes one good and one bad is only my own perception of that. If I can soften off on the perception of what happened and look at the vibration as just a vibration, yeah, I can get information from those, whether it's sound, music sound, or if it's like harmful sound of the mind. Yeah, we could think about thinking as music because it's a vibrational pattern. It's actually not much difference than the sound of my voice. They're the same thing, once just a little more subtle. You can't hear it with your ears grossly. So it's all kind of movement, both the sound and the noise. I think the most important thing I've learned is to practice so that I can settle into the space that both of those move through, to the silent space. Because if I can settle into the silent space, I can listen to both sound and noise without attaching to either of them. And I think that's really where working with sound and music, that's where a sound heals, I feel, in my study and practice. The sound heals in that it takes the mind to a settled place of peacefulness. Which if you look through Buddhism or yoga or, I mean, pretty much any spiritual lineage or school, they're looking to access that root place. And there's many names. Shiva, a god, fundamental consciousness, one mind. There's so many names for this pervasive spaciousness of the mind, which both sound and music move through. I did try to push away noise for a long time. I mean, that's essentially what alcoholism is you're trying to push away noise. And it didn't help me in any way to do that. I feel what I actually needed to do was listen to the noise, just as if I was listening to music, but listen to it from a place of peacefulness. Yeah, to know myself as if we know ourselves as the very, very subtle vibration of peace, it's that is, as I know myself, then the other things that move through it, I can simply listen to them. Yeah, because pushing away the noise never helped. Never helped. I find in meditation practice too, I'm doing, you're sitting and you're doing these very subtle listening meditations, using environmental sound or instrumental sound, whatever it is. And then there's like, a jackhammer or something. It can be so easy to like, that wrecked my practice, Or it can be, or you can look at it in the way that it's just another sound. That's how I've moved towards forgiveness and things like that. At least attempted to. A long process. But yeah, that's interesting. I feel like that could be a good chapter of a book. Noise and sound. Yeah.
You mentioned forgiveness, and on your website, I read a short piece on forgiveness. Is that about you?
Yeah, that was about some childhood sex abuse that had happened to me when I was between the ages of like 8 and 12. And that path of forgiveness was one that came mainly through recovery, but then continued on through my study and practice of yoga and Buddhism as a way, as a sort of perhaps being the ultimate way to let go of situations. It's not easy, but essentially, when you're in recovery, when I'm in recovery, I'll speak for myself, from alcoholism, one of the biggest things is relapse, of course, whether it be emotional or physically picking up a substance. So the thing that often makes us relapse is the situations that make us suffer. So it's important to try to resolve those causes of relapse quickly. For instance, an addict of my sort, who's quite a hard binge drinker and very prone to depression and suicidal thoughts and all these things, I don't have a lot of time. I don't have years to work through these things. Maybe in a gross amount, but I need to take care of what I can take care of right now. And the quickest way to do that is forgiveness. But forgiveness comes with a root backing of understanding of our true nature. If we look at it through sound, the true nature of us is a peacefulness, a joyous, open state of consciousness. Yeah, it's like a pervasive silent space which we can rest into. It's always there. It's who we are in our truest form. The body, the breath, the mind, all of these things are part of our experience. But that pervasiveness, that peacefulness, which is always unharmed, untouched. I often refer to it as the sort of the silence that the sound moves through. You could see it that way. The stillness that movement dances through without disturbance. It came with the understanding through Buddhism and yoga that is the root of all people. Any human, that is the root. And it's not separate from my peacefulness. We attune to the same one. So if that is the root of somebody, if that is who they are, the peacefulness, their actions, for instance, are simply cause and condition of things that they've been through. They're simply reacting. Yeah, it's as if I was to push something and it moves. It's just reacting. So I brought that into all the things that have happened to me. People have harmed me when I was a kid. Yeah. It's removing the actor from the action, not to condone the action, not to say, oh, that was okay that you're doing this to children. Obviously, it's not. But to know that the actor, the true actor, is that peaceful space. Even though they're doing very harmful things within body and mind, they're just cause and effect. Their suffering gets blown out. In that case, the suffering is influencing children, which is terrible. So it's with that understanding that forgiveness, I'm not forgiving the act, for instance. I'm forgiving the one who is suffering, because we all suffer. That's part of the human experience, is that suffering. So that is kind of the root of forgiveness I've always taken, and I found forgiveness to be ultimately useful as long as I don't try to negotiate with it. Yeah. Oh, I can forgive this person, but not that one. Yeah. Because then again, that's my own noise is making justifications. I can't do that. That's not part of my spiritual practice. But it came with that realization and that understanding through teachers and through studying and through a really great therapist I worked with for a long time of who am I? Yeah, who really am I? Am I the mind and the resentment, or am I the space that gets experienced from? If I'm that peacefulness, we'll just call it peacefulness. You could call it one mind, fundamental consciousness, whatever. If I'm that, then every human being must be that at the root. Yeah, it's just the mind gets so busy because everything that happens in our lives is stored in our body and our mind. So the stillness gets disturbed. It gets kind of like a layer of mud over a block of gold in a way. Yeah. So I think it's important for us as humans to work on that layer of mud so we can make a little more access to the block of gold, to that still space, that light or heart. You know, some Buddhist teachers would just call it straight compassion. It's just compassion or love or whatever name. So that's kind of how forgiveness manifested for me, and that really helped me let go. It still does, still now, to know that sort of truth. Otherwise, it's very difficult to forgive from no ground. It's hard to forgive people just from the mind, because the mind is dualistic, so it holds on to all these things. A lot of folks are looking for some sort of relief. One of my teachers would always say, like, nobody comes to yoga because their life is amazing, which I always found funny. But I think the most important thing is experiential. I can sit here and talk to you. We could talk about philosophy for 2 days, straight. But it's really an experience that I think when you experience peace in your own mind, you begin to ask yourself questions about what everything else is. Yeah. If you can access a little bit of peace, if you can access a little less separation between you and everything else, a little taste, you start to question what's the anger, or you get a little disentangled from anxiety, let's say. So you start to question yourself. In Zen, they call it the great doubt. It's an aspect of what we would call the great doubt. The great doubt would be, who am I? What is this whole thing? This body and the mind, they always seem to be changing and moving, and I'm suffering because I think, or I'm totally attached to them. I'm totally attached to the mind and the body staying a certain way. No matter how much money I make or how many drugs I do, I can't seem to sustain the thing I'm trying to maintain, or keep completely consistent. And I think once we access a little bit of peace, even a little openness in body, a little openness in breath, a little spaciousness in mind, it's that questioning of, like, what's all this other stuff? What is the anxiety that's making me so uncomfortable? Because we become to understand that we're not completely the anxiety. Another teacher of mine always says, like, the practice is work. It's essentially to just present the teachings that are there that work, because they work. They've worked for thousands and thousands of years. I'm not going to create some new thing that's going to resolve everybody's issues quicker, So when people come, I don't think that spiritual realization, for instance, and resolving trauma are separate things. They go hand in hand, and so I just encourage the practice, and encourage tools that help with the practice, because the practice will do it. The practice is very consistent in that way. I think, as a role of it in a teacher, because we have so many different people coming in, it's important to have a lot of tools in order to offer people. The reason that there are so many spiritual practices and faiths, and because there's so many different type of people. The Buddha said there's 84,000 gates to awakening, or methods to awakening, because there's so many different types of people. So it's important to be able to help people find a path that works for them. But to hold the understanding that I in this body and this mind, I can only do what I do. It's really up. It's up to practitioners to take a hold. It's like in 12 steps. They're very. I can show you this is the path. There's the road. Whether you walk down the road or not, that I can't I can't do that for you. But to be able to be there to help offer tools which can resolve suffering, I think is the main thing. And so when people come, it depends, if I'm working with people one-on-one, it's much more in-depth. I ask them way more questions, so I can be very particular about the work that we're going to do. But in group settings, it's about that, I think, really offering tools, and then if they want to pick up the tools, I'll do everything I can to try to offer resources and things. I mean, there's so many types of yoga, and movement yoga is only one aspect of yoga. Obviously, sound is my main focus of study, and that's a huge field of yoga. Yoga, we could say, is kind of like roots of finding union, less separation, more contact with our true nature. I'm not sure, but I think I would say to go explore for a while. Explore. Try different types and different teachers and different techniques. Because it's important to know also what we're looking for. What are you searching for in doing that? It's important to know, to be honest with yourself in what you're looking for, because there's certain types that will be more useful for you. If you're looking to heal your body and stretch your back, then yoga asana, you go find a really good asana teacher. And there's so many asana teachers now, studios you can adventure to, and particular specialists as well. If you're looking to work with the mind, there could be a different aspect which might be useful. If you're suffering from anxiety and depression, or there's different approaches to yoga which might be more beneficial for what you're looking to balance out. And it's important to find a teacher that you resonate with, that is ethical and is operating properly. I always find that has been abundantly useful for me, to have somebody to ask questions to, and to help keep the tires on the right road. Has been very, very useful. Yeah, because there's so much out there, so it's good to explore. Another teacher of mine would say, explore for 5 years and then see what works. It doesn't have to take that long, obviously, and you might do something for 1.5 years and then it doesn't really work anymore, and you kind of move. But after 5 years, you can kind of get a taste of practice. Yeah. Oh yeah, Rhythm Yoga Project I designed, created 3 years ago maybe. And it's still something I'm working on. It's still something I'm studying and practicing and working on. It's a group of practices which focus on sound. So whether it be sound, I'll say sound and embodiment, because we have to include the body in spiritual practice. Now, through all the studying I've done on listening practices and work with sound, there's not a lot of talk in including the body. And it's been interesting because the body we have to have embodied experience, especially when we're working towards something like self-realization. So the Rhythm Yoga Project is a large group of practices which base around sound as a route to self-realization. Sound has been used in every spiritual school for this purpose. It's just not talked about so much. The things I have to try to find, I'm trying to find books that aren't printed anymore and all these things, because it's not. Sound is getting studied more, yeah, but it's getting studied more not as a tool for self-realization so much as a kind of a tool for the body, physical body. So I'm putting together practices that revolve around sound and embodiment. So there's a lot of listening, vocalization practices, embodied listening, and some movement practices as well. And a lot of movement practices that link live drumming with movement and breath, integrating those systems. So breaking down separation through sound in that way. The listening practices are often more subtle, which can be very powerful. But we're not moving, they're more seated practices. And chanting is using the voice and working with the breath to things like attuning to chakras, opening channels like the throat or this upper channel of the body. And we also, of course, link chanting and listening together. And so that's what it is. I mean, it's still something I'm still creating. I'm still writing. So I don't know if I'll write a book eventually or something, but we'll see how the path goes. But right now, the main practice is the integration between live music, breath, and movement. And those things all incorporating together, which also includes, the practice includes chanting and embodiment and a few other aspects. And it pulls from Nada Yoga. It also pulls from Buddhist listening practices and chant practices. I've read a lot of things, Sufism and Kabbalah, although I don't study those as in-depth. It's more kind of interest in those. Mostly Nada Yoga and Buddhist practices in listening and vocalization and things. Because now it's not so much about sound anymore. It's more about silence than it is anything. A lot of the texts and things I'm studying and practices I'm doing now focus more on silence. As sound is a bridge. Sound is like a bridge to walk over. Yeah, if we were to use the Buddhist Heart Sutra, it's like it's the boat that takes you across the river. But then you leave the boat, because you're on the other side. You're in the silence. I'm working on a grouping of probably 30 practices right now, which I was considering putting into a book form because they've just been so useful for me. And they go right up from gross listening, like you're listening to my voice, right down to very subtle listening to space and things like that. A lot of my life it was just gross sound, gross drumming in particular for a long time, rhythm. But I never, it was just something I did, I didn't know why I was doing it. And I didn't know why I always kept coming back to it, even though I was drinking all the time. It just kept going back to that thing. I mean, I know more now of why that was, but yeah, I've never thought about that. Yeah, because it's definitely changed. That's for sure. Yeah, it seems to have gone much more gross to much more subtle, and the subtlety continues on. It's like the subtlety, you can work on it forever. Right now I'm studying, so I'm practicing vocal technique, overtone chanting and undertone chanting mainly, as well as mantra techniques, and then studying Japanese shakuhachi, which has been very, very interesting. And then I've begun to start to write some new stuff using both of those. And then integrating electronic music. One thing I'm working on right now is live looping. Layering overtone singing with electronic percussion and samples. And doing that all live into these very long sound experiences, hour and a half, where it just never stops. because of the looping, you can layer and you can bring things out and in, and you can do all these very intricate things. So that's been my main focus now for, I don't know, 6 months probably. And singing was something new for me, even overtone singing. So it's been taking a lot of, so I guess I'm kind of in a state of practice, and have been for probably a year. So I, you know, four to 7 hours a day are probably spent in practice, and then I go teach or I do something and come back. And then of course the studying, because I'm always, I'm very interested in how sound is approached around the world. So I'll read or I'll talk to African teachers, and then I'll go talk to Buddhist teachers and study with them and their techniques and see what's there, and go nada Indian classical music. I'll see what they're saying and what they're practicing, and really what I'm looking for is the commonality that crosses them all. And there's quite a bit. I mean, there's different focuses. Obviously in Africa, a lot of the focus for me is on rhythm, and their philosophies, their ideas of drumming are, I mean, far ahead of most groups around the world, because it's rhythm in Africa is intertwined with society. You know, every polyrhythm, for instance, these different counts and these different lengths and these different way to play patterns layered on top of each other is like a bunch of different people walking around in a city, but somehow they integrate into a one. So things like that have been very, very interesting to me. So that's where I've been, but I'm going to start writing again soon, integrating the vocal work and mantra with electronics, and probably put out an EP first. It's a little less, a little less to bite off at one time, do a 4-track or something like that, and then yeah, go from there. And I really want to start doing the looping live, have these sound meditations, which are quite lengthy. It's very immersive. Nada yoga is a very immersive practice. You're really diving in fully to the sound, and so when you take that for length, it's quite powerful as a meditation technique to get you towards that silent space. So that's kind of what I've been doing for a year and working on right now. Yeah, I've taught a few, and I'm lining up some more right now. So I'll be in Europe at the end of May, and then probably looking at going to Asia later this year, Southeast Asia. And I've been lucky enough to study with some great teachers online, which has been helpful. But hopefully we'll be able to get out and do some more soon. And music is starting to open back up, and countries are starting to open back up, which is helpful. But aside from that stuff, it's mostly developing the practices that I'm working on, and practicing, and looking to write more music. Because when you record, I mean, it's not the same as playing live, but it branches. It's so much more accessible around the world, of course, because recordings are recorded, so anybody can access them, and I can only be in one place at one time. So I think recordings are very useful and helpful, and can serve as practice tools. I'm not sure. You know, that happens in recovery a lot. It's a 12-step program. Works a lot with a higher power. So those questions come up a lot in recovery, in 12-step recovery. Again, I just kind of try to offer people tools, and there's no need to interrupt or stop us whatever somebody's practicing. Or actually, I've found it quite integrative. to find the cross threads has been really helpful for me. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these belief systems have different ideals, but at some point they cross through. I've had some really interesting conversations the last few years, working with people from indigenous cultures, for instance, and the viewpoint of certain indigenous ideas and how those kind of integrate with yoga in certain ways. People will pick up what's useful for them, and I always say if something's not useful, just don't. Like, this life and this body is quite short. So if something's not useful or in some way benefiting your life, it's just taking time. It's taking your prana, your life energy. So there's always a cross thread. There's always somewhere where these things cross over. And I found that super useful for myself in like finding where it crosses, where recovery ideas cross over with Buddhist ideas or yogic ideas or Sufi ideas. It's there's a lot of intermingling. It's like a bunch of different paths that seem to lead to the same place. Sometimes people are interested in why their beliefs are so hard, like why they hold their beliefs so stiffly, because for a lot of us, holding really, really strong, tight beliefs can cause a lot of suffering. And they're often hard to let go of because there are things we pick up from when we're children, or so some people are very interested in loosening their grip on their beliefs, and that's an interesting thing to work with in the mind as well, because it's inherently tied to our sense of self. So we can really kind of work with our sense of self and what that means as we work with beliefs, if somebody's finding that they want to take that path. Yeah. There's always folks with physical challenges. I mean, these bodies, the bodies they change quick, whether it's age or injury or something like that. So there's always a big variation in physical as well as mental. A lot of people, struggle with anxiety or depression, or I've worked with a few people who have autism, especially in the drumming. It can be very useful for ADHD, autism, and those things. So I've taught both people in yoga and in just percussion. But there's always something accessible. So it's just about finding what is accessible that they can focus on. And then it will grow from there. Yes. There just needs to be a door in. Once you get in find something that's accessible, okay, well then I can do that, and this is interesting to me, and then it starts to just blossom out itself. Nobody has to do that. I have one student who has some challenges who mentioned the other day that they've been able to do Shavasana now for a month, which was brand new for them. Like just laying on the floor at the end of practice. They always had to sit up because they were just they needed to be upright for their mental state. And they said, well, it's really like I've been able to lay down and sort of let go of the palms of my hands a little bit. So something like that, for instance, it's one pose, but just that will open the door to many, many other things, far beyond the practicing on the mat and the cushion or whatever you're doing. Those things go right through your whole life. They continue on. So that's why I think it's important as a teacher to have a lot of tools, because you do have those variations. So it's important to be able to have that, help someone or serve someone to access that in point. Yeah, the overdose rate has gotten really, suicide rates are very high too, and as well as relapse rates. It's very tough. The mind is very strong. Isolation never helped. We're not supposed to be isolated from each other. So it's really tough to give advice, I think, in those states, because I know those states. I know I've relapsed. I've done a lot of those things, and I've been in that kind of depression where it's like I'm never getting out of this hole. It's like this is it. I think that the best thing is to know that there's help if you want it. There's a lot out there. Um, there's a lot out there for folks that can be accessed. But it's such a complex thing. It's not that easy. Recovery programs, for instance, are so vast. They're everywhere. And I mean, I found it abundantly useful. That in turn with working with my mind. But working with my mind took a long time. That wasn't... and it's not really something that I voluntarily went into. It's more something that I either had to do or I just wasn't going to be alive anymore. So it was more of like a giving up. I was just tired of fighting, you know? Yeah, I think that's kind of I don't even love the word advice because it's like, I don't really know, you know, I don't really know. It's like, you recover, but in my view, it's like, I don't really do a lot. I just kind of follow the practices. And things have seemed to come around a lot. But again, I'm just a human being, and recovery and things are one day at a time. Like I could falter at any point because the mind is super powerful. So the best thing I think off the top for me was like, go get help. Because I just didn't have control. You know, it's like I'm relapsing. I'm like essentially going insane. So I just didn't have control. So the first thing was like to get somebody else to help me out. And then you get a little more ground over time, I think. You know, I mean, I'm 5 years in recovery. It was like the first 3 years were not good. Like it wasn't good. I was struggling all the time. I just didn't want to suffer anymore. So there's only two ways out of that for me, really. One was to take my life, or one was to just give up and get help. Thankfully, the giving up, the fight of like the everyday drinking and things, the binging really hard, giving that up showed promise, so I just stuck with it. But it took me time, for sure. I'm really in a place right now of like, there's a lot of change happening. So it's like the wheels are turning of everything, but they haven't led anywhere ultimately, nor will they. Yeah, so that's kind of the state I'm in right now. Right now, I haven't particularly gotten anywhere. Yeah, I'm just happier. I guess like to be continued would be the... We'll see, you know, to be continued. Right now I'm teaching every day. Yeah, for now. And then we'll see how that goes. But I teach also meditation, so I'm not doing asana every day. I'm not doing movement practices every day, but teaching every day, sometimes multiple times. Yeah, I don't know if it's a flawless living. That's for sure. What's something unorthodox that I do? I don't know, eat chocolate, watch bad movies, I guess. You know, I have a teacher, one of my main mentors, and has become a really, really close friend, always says that sometimes it's good to just like watch trash TV and eat bad food. Because it gets you back, it keeps you in this this realm, let's say. I mean, I still listen to rap music, and I love house music, and you know, I don't know if those things are unorthodox, but yeah, it's all. I mean, the more I study and the more I practice, it seems like the more I understand that all of those things are just part of the wonderful movement of it all. You know, there's nothing to push away. There's nothing to attach to. So as long as I try to keep that mindset, I don't know, unorthodox is a funny way to look at it. But sometimes I drink coffee. That's like when that's when I'm really partying. But other than that, you know, I don't party anymore, obviously. So a lot of that has stopped. But I mean, all of that has stopped. But it's for the better. But I still like to do, unorthodox is funny. travel if I can. Yeah. Yeah, it's harder to stay attuned to like a what can I say, like a peaceful presence if I overwork really, really hard. So I try to, I really take an effort to not do that anymore. I've had really bad experiences with that, over practicing, overworking, and yeah. Just go to my website, jandrewsyogamusic.com, and then that kind of branches off into the other things. I mostly sell them on Bandcamp is the best way. I've also put out some stuff for yoga teachers, which is royalty free, so they can use the music in their recordings for online content that they're doing. Sometimes I put playlists together for yoga classes, like I'll pre-mix them. But I'm not really playing in clubs or anything right now. But that might start again too. I'm not really sure. I know that some people like bring in DJs for practice, but I'm much more prone to playing than DJing tracks. Unless I'm working with my Celtic music, and then it's more DJ based. But for more of the meditation sound stuff, I'm much more prone to playing live. Mm-hmm.